In Chapter 24 of Conquest with Zero Strength and Magic, we face Hinoka and her legions of flyers. On this map, Hinoka will periodically activate Dragon Veins, which will drastically boost the movement of flying units, while simultaneously decreasing the movement of ground units. It can be quite difficult to deal with the massively expanded threat range of her flyers, which comprise more than half the enemies you will fight on this map. But you can counter this by activating Dragon Veins of your own, which will reverse this dynamic. By carefully sequencing your actions, you can exploit this mechanic to have boosted movement for all of your characters. Simply move your flyers first before activating the Dragon Vein, and that way both their flying and non-flying units will have boosted move for the turn. To bring the strongest force I can for this map, I need to have as many flying units and bow users as possible. Archers are good for obvious reasons, and flyers are necessary to fight the enemy flyers over otherwise inaccessible terrain. I make sure to bring Shigure, who I promoted into a Kinshi Knight, to use effective damage with the Beast Killer as well as bows. The map starts with several sets of initially aggressive enemy squads. If I sit still, all of the enemies will crash into me at once, which is basically impossible to survive, so I decide to be proactive. I move out to attack, and I'm almost immediately overwhelmed and slaughtered pretty much instantly by the sheer number of enemies that are aggroed on top of additional group-based reinforcements. It takes a few tries before I realize that many of the close-by ground enemies are actually not aggressive until you move into their range. So by moving carefully, I can avoid fighting quite a few enemies and all their associated reinforcements until I'm more ready to do so. The initial wave of enemies comes in three groups. There's one squad of flyers from the bottom, a squad of ground units from the upper left, and even more flyers in the upper right. So I start the map by trying to defeat the enemies before they can join up. I start by setting all my flyers into the lower left, taking extreme care not to trigger the ground enemies on the island, because doing so will cause a massive amount of reinforcements to spawn. I easily manage to take out all three of these flyers with a massive amount of savage blows, using lunge to increase the flexibility of my attacking positions, allowing me to just barely stay out of range of the ground enemies. I then quickly move everyone back to the starting area to take out the flyers from the upper right, which is quite easy because of my high bow unit count. The last four enemies are aided and annihilated with even more savage blows. After dealing with the initial wave, I can now tackle each piece of the map in sequence. This map is structured such that there are three main groups of linked AI enemies that each have massive reinforcement waves attached to them. The first group are the enemies on the two close-by islands, the second is Setsuna squad, and the third are all the enemies that defend Hinoka. After initiating combat with any of these groups, you'll be hit with around a dozen reinforcements over the course of the next 2-3 turns, most of which are flyers. Fortunately, I am abnormally well equipped to fight flying units because of my high bow unit count, and I'm often able to one-round them, which is extremely good action economy in this challenge. I start by initiating combat against the enemies on the island to the left. I use Jacob as a wedge to block all of the Onmyoji, taking advantage of his Tonebreaker skill to dodge tank them, and have Korin block the Oni savages. While I do this, I set all the rest of my flying units to ambush the enemy reinforcements immediately when they spawn. I manage to clean up the island and the nearby flyers, but I am soon hit by a pincer attack by the remaining forces. 3 Falcon Knights attack from the left, and 3 more Falcon Knights plus 3 Onmyoji attack from the right. This is normally a formidable force, but unfortunately for the enemy, I can defeat flying units very easily. I one-round all of the enemies on the left with bows, and the enemies on the right have foolishly moved in 2 Densei formation, allowing me to do a ridiculous amount of damage with stacks replicated savage blows. Next up is Setsuna's group, which frustratingly is in range of Azama's Hexing Rod. Azama has 6 Hexing Rod uses that can permanently have your unit's HP for the duration of the map, which is quite painful. I bait out the Hexing Rod with my squishy units and generics, then move on to take on Setsuna's squad, which once triggered will also launch 3 turns of reinforcements. I am pleased to once again find that the enemies have moved into an extremely dense formation that is very vulnerable to savage blow. While I managed to deal quite a savage blow against the enemy forces and take out Setsuna, there's still quite a few enemies remaining. I move Kaze to block off the Onmyoji reinforcements, but sadly, one of my Amaterasu Spearmasters dies on the counterattack. I take care of the Rebens on the next turn, and the 8 reinforcing flying units arrive too late to help, and they are felled by my archers. Now, only Hinoka and her defenders remain. Fortunately, this is the weakest of the 3 main enemy groups. I accidentally expose my flying units to enemy Kinshi Knights as I move to kill the reinforcing Oni chieftains, but I manage to salvage the situation by surrounding the cherry trees, making the enemies unable to fly over to launch an effective attack. All the remaining reinforcements are exclusively comprised of flying units, and I quickly obliterate them with a hail of arrows. After all of this effort, Hinoka goes down pretty quickly after being hit with 3 Poison Strike Savage Blows for 120% of her max HP, and she is finished off by Mozu. I try to capture her Oni chieftain pair-up because he has certain blow on life and death, but sadly Korin instantly evaporates him with a 57 damage crit. With this, I have routed the map and then seized to complete the chapter. This was a pretty tough map, and I definitely thought it would be even more ridiculous than it was, but fortunately the high amount of enemy flyers made it much easier to handle large enemy groups, making it surprisingly manageable. Sadly, this is the last map where we fight flyers in any significant quantity, so this temporary advantage ends right here.